for the history of Earth before the occupation by the genus Homo, including the period of early hominins. See Geology of Europe and Human Evolution. The prehistory of southeastern Europe, defined roughly as the territory of the wider Balkans Peninsula, covers the period from the Upper Paleolithic, beginning with the presence of Homo sapiens in the area some 44,000 years ago, until the appearance of the first written records in classical antiquity, in Greece as early as the 8th century BC. Human prehistory in southeastern Europe is conventionally divided into smaller periods, such as Upper Paleolithic, Holocene, Mesolithic, Epipaleolithic, Neolithic Revolution, expansion of Proto-Indo-Europeans, and Proto-History. The changes between these are gradual. For example, depending on interpretation, Proto-History might or might not include Bronze Age Greece, Minoan, Mycenaean, Thracian, Lemnian, and Venetic cultures. By one interpretation of the historiography criterion, southeastern Europe enters Proto-History only with Homer. At any rate, the period ends before Herodotus in the 5th century BC. Paleolithic, Balkan transition to the Upper Paleolithic. The earliest evidence of human occupation discovered in the Balkans, in Kozarnica, Bulgaria, date from at least 1.4 million years ago. There is evidence of human presence in the Balkans from the Lower Paleolithic onwards, but the number of sites is limited. According to Douglas W. Bailey, the Paleolithic period, literally the Old Stone Age, is an ancient cultural level of human development characterized by the use of unpolished chipped stone tools. The transition from Middle to Upper Paleolithic is directly related to the development of behavioral modernity by hominids around 40,000 years BP, to denote the great significance and degree of change. This dramatic shift from Middle to Upper Paleolithic is sometimes called the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. In the late Pleistocene, various components of the transition, material culture and environmental features, indicate continual change, differing from contemporary points in other parts of Europe. The aforementioned aspects leave some doubt that the term Upper Paleolithic Revolution is appropriate to the Balkans. In general, continual evolutionary changes are the first crucial characteristic of the transition to the Upper Paleolithic in the Balkans. The notion of the Upper Paleolithic Revolution that has been developed for core European regions is not applicable to the Balkans. What is the reason? This particularly significant moment and its origins are defined and enlightened by other characteristics of the transition to Upper Old Stone Age. The environment, climate, flora and fauna corroborate the implications. During the last interglacial period and the most recent glaciation of the Pleistocene, Europe was very different from the Balkans. The glaciations did not affect southeastern Europe to the extent that they did in the northern and central regions. The evidence of forest and steppe indicate the influence was not so drastic. Some species of flora and fauna survived only in the Balkans. The Balkans today still abound in species endemic only to this part of Europe. The notion of gradual transition best defines Balkan Europe from about 50,000 BP. In this sense, the material culture and natural environment of the Balkans of the late Pleistocene and the early Holocene were distinct from other parts of Europe. Douglas W. Bailey writes in Balkan Prehistory, Exclusion, Incorporation and Identity. Less dramatic changes to climate, flora and fauna resulted in less dramatic adaptive, or reactive, developments in material culture. Thus, in speaking about southeastern Europe, many classic conceptions and systematizations of human development during the Paleolithic should not be considered correct in all cases. In this regard, the absence of Upper Paleolithic cave art in the Balkans does not seem to be surprising. Civilizations develop new and distinctive characteristics as they respond to new challenges in their environment. Upper Paleolithic. In 2002, some of the oldest modern human remains in Europe were discovered in the Cave with Bones, near Anino, Romania. Nicknamed John of Anino, the remains are approximately 37,800 years old. These are some of Europe's oldest remains of Homo sapiens, so they are likely to represent the first such people to have entered the continent. According to some researchers, the particular interest of the discovery resides in the fact that it presents a mixture of archaic, early modern human and Neanderthal morphological features, indicating considerable Neanderthal, modern human admixture, which in turn suggests that, upon their arrival in Europe, modern humans met and interbred with Neanderthals. Recent reanalysis of some of these fossils has challenged the view that these remains represent evidence of interbreeding. A second expedition by Eric Trinkaus and Ricardo Rodrigo discovered further fragments. Two human fossil remains found in the Mieri and the Cioclovina caves in Romania have been radiocarbon dated using the technique of the accelerator mass spectrometry to the age of 30,000 years BP. The first skull, scapula and tibia remains were found in 1952 in Bayard de Fere, in the Mieri Cave, Gorj County in the Oltenia province, by Constantin Nicolescu Plosor. In 1941 another skull was found at the Cioclovina cave near Comune Buzărăuţ, Hunedoara County, in Transylvania. The anthropologist, Francisc Reina, and the geologist, Ion Th. Simeonescu, published a study of this skull. The physical analysis of these fossils was begun in the summer of the year 2000 by Emilian Alexandrescu, archaeologist at the Vasil Pavan Institute of Archaeology in Bucharest, and Agata Olaria, physicist at the Institute of Physics and Nuclear Engineering Horia Hulabi, Bucharest, where samples were taken. One sample of bone was taken from the skull from Cioclovina. Samples were also taken from the scapula and tibia remains from Mieri Cave. The work continued at the University of Lund AMS Group by Goran Skog, Christina Stenström and Ragnar Hellborg. The samples of bones were dated by radiocarbon method applied at the AMS system of the Lund University, and the results are shown in the analysis bulletin issued on the date 14 December 2001. The human fossil remains from Mieri Cave, Bayard de Fere, have been dated to 30,150 plus or minus 800 years BP, and the skull from the Cioclovina cave has been dated to 29,000 plus or minus 700 years BP. Mesolithic. The Mesolithic period began at the end of the Pleistocene epoch and ended with the Neolithic introduction of farming, the date of which varied in each geographical region. According to Douglas W. Bailey, the Mesolithic is the transitional period between the Upper Paleolithic hunter-gathering existence and the development of farming and pottery production during the post-glacial Neolithic. The duration of the classical Paleolithic, which lasted until about 10,000 years ago, is applicable to the Balkans. It ended with the Mesolithic Ore, where an early Neolithization was peculiar to, with the Epipaleolithic regions with limited glacial impact. The term Epipaleolithic is more preferable. Regions that experience less environmental effects during the last ice age have a much less apparent, straightforward, and occasionally marked by an absence of sites from the Mesolithic era. See the above Douglas W. Bailey quote. There is lithic evidence in Serbia, southwestern Romania, and Montenegro. At Ostrava Banaui, the Quina Turkului rock shelter in the Danube Gorges and in the nearby caves of Clementa people make relatively advanced bone and lithic tools. The single site representing materials related to Mesolithic in Bulgaria is Pobită Câmpeni. There is no another lithic evidence on the period. There is a 4,000 gap between the latest Upper Paleolithic material and the earliest Neolithic evidence presented at Golubnik. At Odmut in Montenegro there is evidence for human activity in the period. The research of the period was supplemented with Greek Mesolithic, well represented by sites such as Frakli Cave. The other sites of Theopatre Cave and Sesklo in Thessaly that represent the Middle and Upper Paleolithic as well as the early Neolithic period. Yet southern and coastal sites, Greece, which contained materials from the Mesolithic, are less known. Activities began to be concentrated around individual sites where people displayed personal and group identities using various decorations, wearing ornaments and painting their bodies with ochre and hematite. As regards the point of identity, D. Bailey writes, flint-cutting tools as well as time and effort needed to produce such tools testify the expressions of identity in more flexible combinations of materials, which began to be used in the late Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic. The aforementioned allows us to speculate whether or not there was a period, which could be described as Mesolithic in southeastern Europe, rather than an extended Upper Paleolithic. On the other hand, lack of research in a number of regions, and the fact that many of the sites were close to the shore means that Mesolithic Balkans could be referred to as Upper Paleolithic Balkans, which would better describe its gradual continuity and poorly defined development. The relative climatic stability in the Balkans, compared to northern and western Europe, enabled continuous settlement in the Balkans, thus effectively functioning as an Ice Age refuge from where much of Europe, especially Eastern Europe, was repopulated. Neolithic. The Balkans were the site of major Neolithic cultures, including Vinca, Varna, Karanovo, Hamingia. The Vinca culture was an early culture of the Balkans, stretching around the course of the Danube in Serbia, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, Montenegro, Kosovo, Albania, the Republic of Macedonia, although traces of it can be found all around the Balkans, parts of Central Europe and Asia Minor. Kurganization of the Eastern Balkans during the Neolithic is associated with an early expansion of Indo-Europeans. Butmir culture, Star-Savo-Kris culture, Dudesta culture, Kukutani Tripolian culture, Hamingia culture, Vinca culture, Varna culture, Tartaria tablets. Kurgan hypothesis. Bronze Age. The Bronze Age in the Balkans is divided as follows: Early Bronze Age, 20th to 16th centuries BC. Middle Bronze Age, 16th to 14th centuries BC. Late Bronze Age, 14th to 13th centuries BC. The Bronze Age in the Central and Eastern Balkans begins late, around 1800 BC. The transition to the Iron Age gradually sets in over the 13th century BC. The East Balkan complex covers all of Thrace. The Bronze Age cultures of the Central and Western Balkans are less clearly delineated and stretch to Pannonia, the Carpathians and into Hungary. Iron Age. After the period that followed the arrival of the Dorians, known as the Greek Dark Ages or Submycenaean period, the classical Greek culture began to develop in the southern Balkan Peninsula, the Aegean Islands and the Western Asia Minor Greek colonies starting around the 9th century and peaking with the 5th century BC Athens democracy. The Greeks were the first to establish a system of trade routes in the Balkans, and, in order to facilitate trade with the natives between 700 BC and 300 BC, they founded several colonies on the Black Sea coast, Asia Minor, Dalmatia, southern Italy, etc. The other peoples of the Balkans organized themselves in large tribal unions such as the Thracian Odrysian kingdom in the Eastern Balkans in the 5th century BC, and the Alerian kingdom in the Western Balkans from the early 4th century. Other tribal unions existed in Dacia at least as early as the beginning of the 2nd century BC under King Orols. The Alerian tribes were situated in the area corresponding to today's former Yugoslavia and Albania. The name Alerii was originally used to refer to a people occupying an area centered on Lake Skadar, situated between Albania and Montenegro. The term Aleria was subsequently used by the Greeks and Romans as a generic name to refer to different peoples within a well-defined but much greater area. Hellenistic culture spread throughout the Macedonian Empire created by Alexander the Great from the later 4th century BC. By the end of the 4th century BC, Greek language and culture were dominant not only in the Balkans but also around the whole Eastern Mediterranean. By the 6th century BC, the first written sources dealing with the territory north of the Danube appear in Greek sources. By this time the Geta had branched out from the Thracian-speaking populations.